talk about love. Yeah, I got fears, but I ain't got no love. Yes, I got fears. Fear of plane crash. Fear of car crash. Oh, fear of sex. Fear of alcohol.
Alright, so today we're going to talk about the Chowchilla Kidnapping of 1976. Now, this isn't a cold case per se, but it's still very intriguing, mysterious, true crime type of topic. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because this has been in the news recently that I just ran across it. This is a case that I never knew about until just recently. So when I seen it, it struck a chord in me, hence I'm going to talk about it. So what's the big deal? It's kidnapping. Nobody got murdered. Well, just because somebody doesn't get murdered doesn't mean there isn't trauma. Doesn't mean there isn't nightmares for victims. And in this case, you have 26 children as victims. Not to mention, they all have family members, parents. So you multiply that by 3 and figure out, you know, the ripple effect of this kidnapping. Parents affected. I can't even imagine. So what is this? So on July 15th, 1976, 26 kids on a school bus coming home from a field trip from summer school are stopped in the middle of the road by 3 armed men wearing pantyhose over their head. You imagine the fright in those children? And the children are age 5 to 14. They were all young kids. And they are kidnapped by armed men wearing masks. The men order the bus driver into the back of the bus. They threaten them with guns, and one of the armed men began driving. So you have 2 men on the bus armed with shotguns and revolvers, and the third man driving a van, the white van in front of them. They drive a distance, park the school bus in a big field, I believe covered with weeds and trees that you couldn't see it from the road. And they back the bus, or back the van up to the front of the bus, open up the bus doors and tell the children to not step in the grass, to jump into the van. Now, why did they do that? Well, they did that because they didn't want to leave any footprints. Very stupid, because the van left tire impressions in the mud. Anyway, back to the story. So now you have 26 kids and a bus driver in 2 vans. Not only is the white van there loading up kids, there's another green, blackish type van there. They put half the kids in each. These aren't regular vans. They were, but now they're converted. There's paneling on the insides of these vans, so you can't see out. The windows are painted. No windows put down in July 15th heat in California. You can only imagine how hot it is. And they drive these vans with these kids for 11 hours to go 100 miles. Now, I'm still not sure of the reasoning for this. Whether they were taking back roads in order to not be spotted, or why it took them 11 hours to get to the location which was Livermore, California. And again, that's 100 miles away from where they were kidnapped in Chowchilla. Once they get to this location, they are pulled out of these vans one by one by these kidnappers, again, who are armed and wearing masks. When they're pulled out of the van, they're told to remove a piece of clothing or give them their glasses, something, and they are asked their name and their age. Once they give that, they are then placed on a ladder which goes down a hole 12 feet into the ground. They do this for everybody, and they all end up in this hole in the ground. Now, what is this hole in the ground? Well, the kidnappers had planned this for a year and a half. And we'll get into more of the plan and how they come up with this brilliant plan. And I say brilliant very sarcastically. They dig this 12-foot hole and they put a truck trailer, like an 18-wheeler would pull behind, and they put that in this hole, and then they bury it, except for a hole in the roof to which the ladder goes down. Now inside, and I want to say this, when you initially say, and when I initially saw this, 26 kids are kidnapped from school on a bus and buried alive. That's what I read. Is there anything more frightening than the thought of your child being buried alive? That makes me angry. That stirs some kind of emotion in me that I do not like. Hence, I started to research this. Now, inside, just like anything else, you have to dig deeper. Okay? Not everything is what's on the surface. You read a headline, 26 kids buried alive in a school bus. I'm thinking the worst thing ever. I'm thinking they kidnap the school bus, get a hole, put the school bus in it, and they start backfilling it. Well, that's not the case. Not to say this isn't horrific, because it certainly is, but the imagery is different. So this trailer that's been placed in this hole and surrounded by dirt has a bunch of mattresses in it, has some makeshift toiletry, food, water, and ventilation. And what does that tell me? What does it tell you? Well, two things. One, they could expect the kids to be there a long time, buried underground. Two, they didn't want to hurt the kids. Now, physically hurt the kids. Because the emotional damage done to these kids would last a lifetime. But, as an investigator on scene, if I see that, I'm thinking, okay, suspects that I'm looking for. What am I looking for? Certainly somebody probably in their 20s, maybe 30s, could have an older gentleman. By older, I just mean maybe a few years older. Definitely more than one, right? Because we know there's three. One's usually a leader, and that person is usually older. That's what I'm looking for. And it's somebody who, at least, I would say, in that group, cares about the welfare of these children. Now, I'll get comments to say, because I got this with Casey Anthony, when I said Casey Anthony was a good mom. You take it literally. Don't take these words literally. Okay? When I say they care about the children, they certainly don't care about them enough that they freaking buried them alive, right? It's just despicable. But there's something in them to put provisions down there for them to be comfortable. Now you could say, well, they put those provisions down there strictly to keep them alive. Yes, because as we know from the John Benet Ramsey case, a dead victim does not make a good ransom person. How are you going to get a ransom for somebody if they're dead, right? Why would they leave John Benet's body behind if they requested a ransom? Makes no sense, right? Same thing here. So you could say, yes, they just wanted to keep the kids alive. Yeah, maybe. But I will go out on a limb and say one of the people in that group cared about those kids to the extent that they didn't want to hurt them physically. I'm sure they weren't thinking mentally. So it goes back to, you can't believe everything you just read. When I first read 26 kids, school bus, buried alive, I wanted to hang these MFs right then and there. Right off the headline. But you can't do that. You got to dig deeper. Okay? I realized, okay, this is more planned, this is more thought out, and it's not quite as bad as it seems. Yes, it's bad. I get that. But it's not as bad as the initial imagery would like it to be portrayed. And that is the job of a good newspaper. And that's what they did in good news reporting. Get you to tune in, right? So, kids are in this underground tomb for 26 hours. 16 hours. The whole ordeal, the kidnapping, the driving around and everything lasted a total of 36 hours. Kids are crying. Kids are hot, sweaty, underground, pitch black, except for the flashlight that the kidnappers gave them. One of the older kids, Mike Marshall, he was 14, and the bus driver, Ed Ray, who was a farmer, which is dear to my heart because I like to say that I'm a hobby farmer. But I grew up on farmers, and my uncles are farmers, and my dad always wanted to be a farmer, and he did that a little bit in his life, and I enjoy it too. And those are some of the most hardworking, dedicated people you'll ever meet in your life. I have a great deal of respect for farmers, and even a greater deal of respect for Ed Ray, because him and Mike Marshall decided, you know what, we're not going to stay here. If we're going to die, we're going to die trying to get out of here. So the hole that they came down in, that the kidnappers put a manhole cover over, 200-pound batteries, things to keep them from getting out, didn't work. They began kicking, they began hitting, they began pushing, they began using wood that was left down there because the trailer started to collapse from the weight of the dirt that's put on it. So they put 2x4s to reinforce it. They took a piece of wood from there and from the bed frames, and they began prying, and eventually they saw a crack of daylight. And that right there, folks, is freedom. And once you see that, your motivation starts. And the kids started cheering on 14-year-old Michael. Come on, Michael. Come on, Mikey. You can do it. You can do it. And that gave him motivation to keep going, no matter how tired you are. It's the same way in the Marine Corps, in all military, but I'm specifically because I have experience, obviously, in the Marine Corps. You just keep pushing, no matter how hard it is. But then you get that little bit of motivation, somebody telling you something, or you having a certain thought or a certain smell, and you just push through it. You got to have that heart, and that's what they did. They pushed through it. They were able to break open and get all this dirt that fell in on them and get out. But then they encompassed another box. They constructed another box over top of this opening, and they just kept hitting on that, hitting on that, hitting on that, hitting on that, until finally they broke through that. And by this time, everybody's looking for them. The parents, police, they're scared to death. They couldn't find. How does a big yellow school bus with 26 kids just vanish? Well, luckily, they got up in the police helicopter or plane back then, and they spotted the bus. And from the bus, that's when the clues started. You can see the tire impressions of 2 different vehicles. So now you have 2 vehicles that are involved. You don't specifically know they're vans yet, but the kids were transported. That's important. Now, why is that important? Because initially, when you see or hear a bus is missing, 26 children, who's your first suspect? I'll wait. I don't have to wait long because half of you already said the bus driver. It's the same when an airplane goes missing today. How can it just vanish? Well, first person you look at, especially since 9/11, but this is the pilot. He's in control. School bus is even more so. Now, why, you ask? Well, because they're kids. Okay? You can control them. You're in control. You're in charge. So, he was initially thought of as a suspect. So when the bus is found and the kids aren't there, I think that alleviates the fear a little bit that the bus driver's involved. Not completely, but now it is kind of looking like some sort of kidnapping. If the bus driver is involved, he must have an accomplice because there's 2 vans, right? Plus there's 3 people. They took him, ordered him in the back of the bus. I mean, but the police don't know that yet. They don't know that. So you have all these people looking. Finally, they break out and they don't know where they're at, and they just start walking all together. And they find like a grain elevator. For you got farmers that don't know what that is, just like an elevator that you can put hay or grain and it takes it up to the 2nd floor of the barn or silo, whatever it is. And here it was an elevator for rocks. They were at a quarry. And there were people walking around with hard hats, and they see these 26 dirty, disgusting, grimy children, and a bus driver doesn't have any clothes on except for his underwear because they made him strip. You're like, what the heck is going on? And they said, hey, we're from Chowchilla, and we're lost. Well, calls were made, and they were found. Happy ending? Well, let's get to these suspects. Who would do such a dastardly deed? I love that. Oh, that's always stuck with me. Dastardly deed. You know who told me that for the first time? Richard Walters from the Vidocq Society. I was at his house and we were discussing a case of mine, and he said that to me. No, we actually were at lunch. We had left discussing the case, and we went and had lunch together. And while we were eating lunch, he said that, and it's always stuck with me. So I say that from time to time. Now, the kids are safe. They come back home. Physically, they're safe. Doctors check them out. Everything's fine. There's no sexual assault. Nothing like that. This is strictly a kidnapping. Nobody was killed. Thank God. But the investigators began piecing it together. And where would you start? Tire impressions are nice. Sure. I know where I would start. Property where the kids were found and where they were buried. And I'm sure that's what they did, because they found out that one of the suspects, well, how can I phrase that? He wasn't a suspect yet. They learned that the quarry was owned by a man named Fred Woods. Well, Fred Woods had a son who had a little bit of a rap record. He was a loner, kind of goofy, got picked on. All he cared about was cars. But good place to start, right? You know, you start maybe with the father. He owns it. Certainly employees there. I mean, it's a private property. It's big, but there's a fence around it. So you're thinking, well, somebody has to have access to this area. It narrows your population down quite a bit of suspects. Remember, what do? We deduce. So you have the whole state of California as suspects, maybe outside of California. But now it's down to who owns this quarry and has access to it. So it was pretty easy to get to where they did, to name Fred Woods Jr., or the fourth, I think is what he is titled, but it was the son of the gentleman who owned the quarry, who was 24 years old at the time, had money, wealthy. They do a search warrant at his place because he's not found. They do a search warrant and boom, they find everything. Find the shotgun. Find the ransom note, which was never delivered. They find the planning note of how they were going to kidnap these kids. You got it. So then everything falls in place. Well, who's the other two men? Well, when he was arrested for stealing a car a couple years earlier, he had two buddies with him. They were brothers, James Schoenfeld and Richard Schoenfeld. Okay, let's go check them out. Everybody has disappeared. They got their men. Pretty easy investigated for such a, I will say air quotes, meticulously planned event with potential mass casualties. Like I say, the three men skedaddled. One headed to Canada. Richard, the youngest one, who was 22, turned himself in. And remember when I said I would have looked for suspects, one being a little older. Fred Woods was 24. James Schoenfeld was 24. Richard was 22. But Fred, by all intent and purposes, was the ringleader. They fled. They went their ways. Richard turned himself in. The other two were caught. And end of story, right? I mean, no harm, no foul. Nobody was hurt. No money was expended. The ransom wasn't given. They go to trial. They are charged with the kidnapping and a charge called bodily harm. Now, I'm not sure what California's bodily harm entails. I know Pennsylvania's is, because I've arrested people for it, so I know that. But they charged them with bodily harm because some of them had some scrapes and some bruises, and they were convicted, okay, as they should have been. Plenty of evidence. These three were convicted and sentenced to life without parole. I've seen this in California before with the Manson girls and so on and so forth. You know, the death penalty being abolished out there in the mid-70s. Might have been late 70s when death penalty was abolished. But anyhow, it was without parole. These three knuckleheads' lawyer decides to appeal, which is not only are they entitled to, it happens almost every time. But they won the appeal. And the superior court, by superior I don't mean like literally, whichever court heard it, I don't know if it was the superior or supreme or what it was, threw out the bodily harm and saying, no, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't apply here. You know, nobody was physically harmed. Nobody was punched, hit with the butt of a rifle, anything like that. So they vacated that sentence and instead sentenced them to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Now, with possibility, you have what? Hope. These guys had hope. Unfortunately, I don't think those 26 victims, 27 counting Ed Ray, who in my mind is a hero, along with Mike Marshall, for what they did. Their hope, where did it go? You know, Sometimes I think these victims are forgotten because, what? They weren't murdered? So what? The emotional abuse that they suffered at the hands of this kidnapping, being in complete darkness for 16 hours, buried alive, is horrendous. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, I bring it up because they all got paroled. Let's start with the youngest guy, Richard. 2012, at age 57. Out. Walking the streets. His brother James in 2015, age 63. Out. Walking the streets. Mr. Fred Woods, the ringleader. Denied parole a bunch of times. Until last week. Yes, last week. He's granted parole. Now, how do I feel about this? Did they pay their debt to society? Well, I guess that brings the age-old question is, can you change? I feel that you can change. I've changed. You've changed. With age, people change. I promise you that Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel are not going to murder anybody if they are released from jail. I firmly believe that. Now, the Manson girls, for you that don't know who I'm talking about. Yet, they committed a horrendous crime. And they are sorry. I know they're sorry. I'm sorry about some of the things that I did when I was younger. You still have to pay the consequences for those actions. Right? Now, these three imbeciles spent 40 years behind bars. Is that enough? My answer may surprise you. And I did a lot of thinking on this. I want to say yes. Yet, when it comes to what they did to children, I'm going to say no. So many things could have gone wrong when they were underground that would have changed everything. And they would have had the souls of 26 children and one adult on their conscience for the rest of their lives. So what, they gave them provisions? So what, they gave them water, Doritos, Cheerios? The fact remains, they put in a plan and a course of action to carry this out to children. Children! Now, why did they pick children? Let me give you a quote by one of these idiot kidnappers, James. We select multiple victims for multiple millions of dollars, and we chose kids because they are precious and don't fight back, and their money will be paid. Spoken like a true idiot. Spoken like someone that doesn't have any remorse. I'd like to know when he gave that quote. Let me tell you what really bothered me. What really upsets me is I saw a short clip of like a newscast trying to talk to one of these kidnappers. I'm not sure which one it was. You know how, and this pisses me off too, newspaper people jump out at you and, like, you know, do the whole surprise attack, jump out at you. Hey, can you comment on how you feel about this? I don't like that. And they did that to this guy. No, this guy deserves it. But I can see he's uncomfortable and he's trying to get in his house and stuff. And he's making comments. They're asking him questions. And instead of, you know, what he says is, one of the questions or comments was, don't you feel that those kids were traumatized or something? He said, yeah, that's what I heard. Something to that effect. And what he should have done, and what I would have wanted to see, is for that son of a bitch to stand there, turn around, face the camera, look everybody in the eye, and say, hey, I'm freaking sorry. I'm not the same man I was when I was 24 years old. I'm sorry for all the pain that I caused these victims and these victims' families. And I don't ask for your forgiveness because I don't expect it. But know that I am sorry from the depths of my heart. And then go on with your day. That's what I wanted to see. This jerk off didn't do that. And I didn't like it. Now, he's not obligated to do anything that I say. He's his own man, does what he wants to do. But maybe that guy should still be in prison. I don't know if he's done enough time. He was sentenced to life in prison. Now, I'm not a straight, stickler to the rules and say, well, life in prison's life in prison. Listen, let's say somebody got convicted, life in prison. They had come home and they caught a burglar in their house and they shot him. Sentenced to life in prison. I don't think that guy should be in life for prison. Maybe the gun that he owned wasn't registered or whatever it was. There's certain circumstances in life where leniency, clemency, parole should be granted. There is. Yet I'm not sure this is one of those. Remember when I said about Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel? Members of the family, Charles Manson. They're in their 70s, 80s, and I said they wouldn't kill anybody again. I really believe that. These guys, I'm not going to say they're going to kill somebody. Maybe they're not. But they're idiots to make a plan like this and put those kids in jeopardy, burying them alive. If you're that stupid, even at age 24, you're going to be that stupid at age 57. So let's say, yes, they're all wealthy. They don't have to worry about money. They didn't have to worry about money then. Yet they made it about themselves. You know why? Just because everybody else like them in this world that want more. What they have, they cannot be content with. Everybody wants more, more, more. That's why they did this, folks. This idiot, Fred, got the idea from watching a Dirty Harry movie where the antagonist hijacks a bus full of kids. It reminds me of the Zodiac and one of the letters that he wrote, saying he was going to pick off the kiddies when they come bouncing off the bus. I remember that. That stuck with me. Been almost 6 years since I even looked at anything Zodiac. But that sticks with me. When you start talking about hurting children, that sticks with me. These guys had all the money in the world. And they wanted more. Yeah, maybe they didn't have it. Their parents had it. But if their parents had it, they had it. This Fred Woods has like $100 million trust fund. And I seen that some of the surviving members of this kidnapping sued the estate. And they got some money, but not a lot. They should get it all. In my mind, my opinion, give every one of them. Give them all $1 million apiece. Money doesn't change anything. Money's not going to take away those nightmares that those kids had growing up of being buried alive and having guns placed to their heads. I don't care that they gave them provisions. I don't care they gave them a goddamn Snickers bar while they're under there. That doesn't mean nothing. You still buried them alive, and you put those parents through absolute hell, not to mention the kids. What if they were never found? Let's say the 3 kidnappers on their way home get hit head on by a vehicle and all 3 die. Who knows that those kids are there? Nobody. And if they don't break out themselves, the ventilation fan that they so graciously ran into there so the kids could get air quit. They would have suffocated to death. They would have starved to death. Being buried alive. What if one of those support beams broke? As you can see by the pictures, it wasn't very safe. And all that dirt came tumbling down on them. And the pressure and the weight and the lack of oxygen killed those kids. Was it their intent? No. But it's their stupidity that caused it. For somebody not getting killed, this case has got me fired up. And that clip of that guy getting released from jail saying what he did really irritated me. Those kids had to go to those parole board meetings time and time again, relive the crime again. They had to testify at trial. And you know one of the most poignant and heartbreaking things that I saw? This little girl, what, 7 maybe, testifying and pointing out who did it, the kidnappers. But when she got done testifying, they were interviewing her, and they asked, why would somebody do this? Right? Why would somebody kidnap you and all these kids and bury you alive? You know what she said? Maybe they weren't loved enough. Oh. Wow. That's special. And maybe she's right. Let me go over my notes. Chowchilla Kidnapping, 26 kids. Summer school, drove to Livermore, California, 100 miles away, 16 hours underground. Hid the bus. Suspects, covered those idiots. The planning that they did, it just goes to show you that best laid plans don't always work out, right? They had this all written down. They were going to take the vans, the bus, kidnap them, get an airplane, jump out of an airplane, and then let the airplane crash, and all this crazy shit. They'll be in the mountains and they'll signal where to drop the money, like D.B. Cooper shit. Okay? And then when it comes time to implement the plan, doesn't quite go as according to plan. And a lot of times it's like that. Their plan was foiled. And the greatest satisfaction I get is that they left the kids there and then went back home and are trying to call the Chowchilla Police Department so they can give their ransom demand, $5 million, for the safe return of these kids. They can't get through because their phone lines are jammed up. They can't tell anybody. So what do these morons do? They go to sleep. They take a nap. Just like the damn Three Stooges. When they wake up, kids are busted out. They found them. Now they just abandon the plan and go. Guilty life sentence without parole reversed. We talked about that. Tire prints. We talked about the truck. The trailer that was buried. Once they found that, they run, I'm not sure if the trailer itself has a VIN number, like a car does, and that's how you track stolen cars, or if it had a plate on it. But they were able to track that trailer to an assumed name. Nope, not a fake name. Fred Woods bought the trailer. It's registered to him. Hell of a lead to follow up on. I wish my cases were that easy, right? But that idiot put the trailer in his name. Not talking about geniuses here, okay? Certainly, as much planning as they did, planning, number one, does not equal success. It is very beneficial, but it doesn't equal success. Planning does not equal sophistication. And planning doesn't mean that you're a genius. Hence, these idiots. Ed Ray, can't talk enough about this bus driver. Goes to work every day, farmer, hell of a guy. I'd have loved to meet him and shook his hand. Same with Mike Marshall. His 14-year-old kid. All those little kids looking up to him. Encouraging him. I'd shake his hand. Give him a hug. Pat on the back. You're a hero, buddy. Both of them. Now, Ed Ray unfortunately passed away in 2012. But he made it to the age of 91. So he lived a great life. And all those kids and all those kids' parents can thank him. For being a hero that he is. And I read somewhere they maybe had an Ed Ray day. And a day. And they should. That's great. The motive. I said money. They wanted more. Not happy enough. This Fred Woods' life was cars. He loved all about cars. But, a Studebaker, a Buick Skylark is not good enough. He wants the Ferrari, the Corvette. Greed, remember. Greed, very powerful drug. That's it. That's it on the Chowchilla Kidnapping. Great documentary on 48 Hours. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a link to it if I can find it. And maybe you can look at it on there. But this is a different type of case that I normally look at, but it's still intriguing. I do cases that are intriguing to me. Something that I think I can speak on. And these guys being released from prison, I don't agree with it. I just don't. And I'm not a hard ass. Again, I pride myself in the ability to be able to see both sides. These three have family members. And they want to see them. They love them. They know that they screwed up. And they're not 22 anymore. I get that. I get it. And they didn't kill any of them. But that is by sheer luck. Okay? Life in prison should be life in prison for these guys. That's my opinion. Okay. So, watch the documentary. Do some research. Some of these pictures that I'm putting up tell the grim story. And my hearts. I wish I had more hearts that I could pass out to all these victims. Make no mistake about it. These children, that bus driver, and their entire family and friend circle are victims. These kids suffered nightmares, traumatic injuries. You know what they did? And there's no fault of the community or the police department, the family. They took them all to Disney World as a therapy. Hey, all this happiness will make them forget about the hell that they endured. It did for a day. They didn't know. They didn't know how to deal with that stuff back then. They tried. It didn't work. Most of these, including Mike Marshall, had some sort of substance abuse problem growing up. All because of the senseless, immature, idiotic act of these three individuals who are now out and about after serving 4 decades in jail. Maybe I'd like to see 4 more decades in jail for these despicable, ruthless individuals, in Kenny Mains' opinion. So with that, hey, thanks for watching another episode of Unsolved No More. You know what time it is, right? Mains out.
All fear of